morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and kick things off. I'm sure that we'll have lots of activity in and out, but welcome to the Ratcliffe Murphy Museum of Art that we're actually in tonight. Our former grounds, but this is where we have the great facilities to host a symposium like this. My name is Joe Becker, and I'm privileged to serve as the director of the museum. This conference has been long in the making and is certainly intimately associated with the great work that resulted in the galleries that you probably all have experienced down at the Ratcliffe Murphy. First and foremost, I want to say we're honored to have so many of the artists that are in the permanent collection here with us for the weekend. You're all very busy, and we appreciate that time, especially those of you that have traveled from far away. For those of you that are from other institutions, on behalf of the university and the museum, welcome. Very, very special thanks to the Debra Foundation for allowing us to do this and several other projects related to the museum. And before we get very specific to this morning's gathering, I just want to say a special thanks and welcome back to Chair Katz. It was his brainchild that gave rise to this opportunity. And although Jared's not physically here, he's still very much part of what we do and who we are. And certainly his partner in crime and leading the charge has been Bridget White. So Bridget, thank you very, very much for taking things on, and to the rest of the education department for, as usual, putting shoulders to the wheel and making something fantastic happen. So without further ado, again, thank you. We're honored that you're here. Hopefully all consider themselves friends and colleagues, and welcome to the museum. Jared.
Hello, fun walk across the stage to get to the podium. Welcome everyone, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for the introduction, Joe. We are really delighted to be hosting this conference, the symposium today on indigenizing museums. So before we get started, I wanted to begin with a land acknowledgement. The Ratcliffe Murphy Museum of Art acknowledges our presence on the traditional land of the Potawatomi peoples, the Miami peoples, and many people from other indigenous nations that now call this land home. As an initial step towards reconciliation and out of a desire for a brighter and more equitable future, the museum is committed to amplifying indigenous voices and building conversations and collaborations through the hosting and support of indigenous artists, art forms, and communities. So I wanted to start with this because our land acknowledgement, we went back and forth a lot. Should we have a land acknowledgement? Is it just a vague gesture? But we decided to do it, A, to be an educational tool to help people understand whose land we are on, and B, to publicly voice our commitment to elevating the voices of indigenous colleagues, artists, scholars. And that's exactly the goal of this symposium today. So I hope if you haven't seen the galleries, you go over and check them out. One of the main driving principles is this idea of polyvocality, that when you hear from a variety of voices from different backgrounds, from different perspectives, we can have a much richer experience and a much deeper appreciation of the artwork we're talking about. And so that's really what we're celebrating today. And so I'm so thankful to all of our speakers, all of our artists and curatorial colleagues for coming and sharing their expertise with all of us. So throughout the day, we'll have a number of different panels. I hope all of you can make it to many of them. People will be trickling in out and out throughout the day. So just quickly, in terms of schedule, we're starting off with a discussion on indigenizing gallery spaces, so thinking about museums, galleries, and how we can infuse indigenizing principles within curatorial practice. We will then have a session on reasserting Potawatomi presence in Michiana through art, so I hope you can all make it back for that. And then we'll finish up with a discussion on personal narratives in a public setting. So please come throughout the day. I have several other thank yous I'd like to make quickly. So first of all, I would like to thank the Terra Foundation for their generous support of the symposium, which it wouldn't have happened without their kind support. Second, I'd like to thank my colleagues in education, especially Bridget Hoyt, for helping to pull this off. They were amazing, and even though, as Joe mentioned, I'm now not here, they were really the people here that helped keep everything going, so thank you for that. And I would also like to thank Rachel Mills for your amazing graphic design work, making this beautiful poster. So let's please all give education a big round of applause for everything they've done. Great. Now I'm delighted to say, being a white male, I'm about to sit down and shut up. So I'm thrilled for that. Yes, I never thought I'd be so excited to hear people cheer for me saying I'm about to shut up, but that is the goal, so thank you. I want to quickly introduce our first two speakers who I'm thrilled to have here. So first, we're going to welcome Debra Yepa-Pappan, who's a visual artist of international acclaim. Her multimedia practice combines digital collage and photography. Her work centers on themes about mixed race identity that incorporate symbolic imagery influenced by her culture and the urban environment. She's committed to changing inaccurate representations of Native people and advocates for the inclusion of Native First voices and perspectives. Yepa-Pappan and the other founding members of the Center for Native Future came together during the pandemic to make space for perpetual Native presence in the city of Chicago. The founding members have combined 20 years of working within the arts community and have all nurtured relationships with tribal communities. So I'm thrilled to welcome Debra today. Following Debra will be Dakota Hoska. Dakota Hoska serves as the Associate Curator of Native Arts and NAGPRA Coordinator at the Denver Art Museum, where she has worked since 2019. Previously, she served as a curatorial research assistant at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, where she supported the groundbreaking exhibition Hearts of Our People, Native Women Artists. Hoska completed her MA in art history in 2019 with a focus on Native American art history at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. She also completed 2 years in the Dakota language study at the University of Minnesota and received her BFA in 2012 in drawing and painting from the Minneapolis College of Art and Design. Dakota has participated in multiple curatorial programs, such as the EPIC International Curatorial Exchange Program, sponsored by the Association of Museum Curators. So I'm so thrilled to welcome both of these speakers. They will give around 20-25 minute presentations. We'll then follow it by kind of a conversation on stage, and then we'll open it up to questions. So please join me in welcoming our honored guests.
Okay. There we go. Hello, good morning, everyone. First, I want to just say some thank yous. Thank you, Jared, for the invitation to come here and to present and talk about the work that I'm doing. Thank you, Bridget, for also taking care of us. Thank you to all of my friends and colleagues who are going to be presenting today as well. It's just so nice that we have these opportunities to get together because we don't always see each other very often. So it's been fun just hanging out. But most importantly, I really want to give a huge, huge thank you to Christine Morsaw, Jason Wiesaw, and David Martin for welcoming us and having us here on your homelands. And particularly, I want to mention the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi for, having us here. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and tell you more about Center for Native Futures. I think I have to update my bio too, because I think I was just having this conversation with one of our artists, Noel Garcia, about our combined experience, which includes, the artists that we're bringing to the table. I mean, we've got 100+ years of experience that we're all bringing together. Many of us have worked in the field of Native art for decades. And so, it was time for us to come to fruition in bringing together coming together and creating this Native American space, this Native American art space in the city of Chicago. So just sharing over here, these are, our co-founders. We have Andrea Carlson, myself, my husband, Chris Pappan, and my very dear friend, Monica Rickard-Bolter. So together, we came together and organized and created our center because we saw that, there was a lack of exposure, there was a lack of representation, there was a lack of space for Native art in Chicago. I met my husband at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and then I brought him back to Chicago with me. I'm Hamas Pueblo in Korean, by the way, but I grew up in Chicago. And upon graduating and coming back to the city, we found very few to no opportunities for Native artists. And, way back then, that was kind of, my dream. I always thought, well, if I won $1 million in the lottery, what would I do with that? And, the dream was always to open our own space, a Native art space. So, that would be the space that would have galleries, that would have studios, and, areas where, artists could practice and create among each other and just be in community with each other. So, some of the major problems that that we had this need and have this need, to address are, that invisibility. Obviously, I'm not invisible. We're not invisible. You can see us here. But it's, when you come to the city of Chicago and many parts around the country, any kind of representation or depiction of Native people is just very stereotypical. And so all around Chicago, there's so many stereotypical images of Native people that's what people expect to see. And that's not what they see when they do see us. And so that creates that invisibility. So, creating the space, creating a place where Native people, where we could just be ourselves, where we can represent ourselves in the way that we want to, is something that's so vital and so important because we are contemporary people. And yeah, again, going back to like how we're imagined by others, it's always just very highly romanticized, highly stereotypical. And that another thing that we find ourselves battling is that the only places sometimes that you can see Native art is in a museum. So that's important for us to say because we also want to make sure that and emphasize that Center for Native Futures is not a museum. We are a fine art gallery focused on contemporary Native American art. And I think, a lot of times people come into our space and, they think it's a museum. And so we have to correct people and we have to let people know that like a museum is not the only place where you can find Native art. Our mission statement, the Center for Native Futures is the epicenter of Native creativity that fosters Native artists of all backgrounds. And our vision statement, the Center for Native Futures brings together Native artists to imagine ourselves richly, where art can provide a lens to learn from the past, nurture our present, and realize a thriving future. And so that was kind of where our thinking was in naming ourselves. So often, Native people are only thought about, in history or historically. And, everybody always wants to learn about our history, our past. And, in doing that, and especially in education, there's so much focus on that it kind of keeps Native people stuck in that past. And so, my mission, my personal mission had always been to, bring Natives into the present, but let's go beyond just the present. Let's think about our future. Let's give hope to our community, to our Native youth, our young people, that we have a future, that we don't have to just imagine what our futures could be, but what we're trying to do here is we're trying to help people, and what we're trying to do is realize what our futures can be. And all through an artistic lens. And I'm sorry, I forgot to start my timer, so I don't know how long I've been speaking. I'm just gonna start it, and then, okay. So, again, we're addressing the needs of our community. I think as Native artists, as Native community members in Chicago, we're immersed in our community. we understand the needs of Native artists because, those are needs that we as artists have. So I think that's another important thing about Center for Native Futures, that, we are a Native artist-led organization. We want to provide space for, for us, for Native artists to have agency. We get to call the shots. That's the kind of the beautiful thing about, just kind of being our own boss, and, running our own space. We could run it however we want to. We're right in the heart of downtown Chicago. We're right in the heart of the Loop. We're on Adams and Dearborn, the beginning of Route 66. And it's just such a great space and such a great place where we can give visibility to Native art, to contemporary Native art. We also, because of our combined experience and, as professional artists, we want to also make sure that we could mentor, younger artists, that we could, provide, critique, that we can help and share our experience with other emerging Native artists. And we do a lot of cross promotion. We do a lot of, we have a lot of partnerships all around the city of Chicago. The nice thing about that too is that, it's hard because right now we are the only Native artist-led organization in the city of Chicago. Much needed. But, I always say, like, I don't want us to be the only ones, but right now we are. And we have a lot of opportunities. We're invited to a lot of tables, we're invited to a lot of, other foundations and institutions to consult. And I leverage that and I use that as an opportunity to not just consult on how people could do better in supporting Native people and Native artists, but also in just trying to change the entire field of art. The entire field of Native art for Native artists. And so our hope right now, we have a really beautiful space in the Marquette building. It's about 3,600 square feet. It's mostly gallery, and we do have a studio where we host an artist in residence. But, our bigger dream one day is to have a large maybe not so large. We realize that managing a building is a lot of work too, and we're not building managers, we're artists. But we want a space where we could provide studios, free studio space for our, Chicago-based or local artists, and, be able to house an artist in residence. Right now, our resident artists are all local in Chicago, so they already live there. But, they have a space where they could get messy, where they can make art. And then show that art. We had our start, we were founded in 2020, and that was during the pandemic, and a lot of our programs were virtual, but we didn't have a lot of programs at the time because we were just starting out. We have our first major funder was the Terra Foundation, so I should thank them also. They've been so involved in that way in supporting us and knowing the importance of supporting Native art and artists, that they also sponsored our first, and actually they've sponsored all of our expo booths. And if you're not familiar with Expo, it's a huge art exposition that happens in Chicago at Navy Pier every year. So our first year there was in 2022. And we've been there ever since, and we'll be there again in 2025. But this was just a wonderful way for us to, share, who our artists are, and really and have this large Native art presence at Expo, which is also another venue that, you'll find a Native artist here and there at different, non-Native owned galleries, but we were the first and only Native art organization that was at Expo, showcasing all Native artists. So there's work here by Jason Wiesaw, also, which we were so happy to include, and Kelly Church, Noel Garcia, our co-founders, myself, my husband, Monica, and June Carpenter. And so, we continue to bring these artists to show at this huge exposition. So to date, we moved into our space at the Marquette building in last year, actually in June. And then we opened with our inaugural exhibition in September. And our first exhibition is this, Native Futures, where we featured 19 plus visual artists and including a few poets in a video as they're reading their poetry. And this was, this was an opportunity now that we had our first physical space to bring together those artists that we had been engaged with previously, either in our expo booth or in a virtual presentation or event. And so this was a long run. I think this was about 8 months, but it was just something that was so impactful for the city of Chicago. We had a lot of people that came in to visit, and I felt like there was just kind of this hunger that people didn't know they had to see, that they wanted to see art like this. We've had so many comments from people that would visit the Art Institute of Chicago, which was actually just 3 blocks away from us, just down the street. And they would come away from the Art Institute disappointed in the things that they saw there as far as Native art goes. And then they come into our space and they're just blown away. And it shows that what we're doing is something that's just so tremendous. We're partly one of the reasons why we jumped to do this too, to bring Center for Native Futures together, is that we were kind of getting tired of waiting around for these big art institutes and these big museums to invite us. They show Native art and Native artists, but really it's just a handful. They're not showing like the whole gamut of our communities, of all the Native artists that are doing incredible work that deserve to be in those kinds of spaces. And also mostly too, and I am a huge critic of museums. I used to work at the Field Museum prior to this, so I have a lot of insight there. I'm not sure how much of that I'll share here, but maybe in person later on. But I'm very critical of museums. So I look at museums and museum practice, with a fine-tooth comb. A lot of art curators that are not Native, that are curating Native art in these big institutions, are always folks that are anthropologists, or they come from an anthropology background. And so they're going to collect and look at things through an anthropological lens. So what we're doing here is we're artists running this. So we're looking through an artistic lens, through a creative lens. We're looking at art in a different way. We're looking at art through our own experiences as Native artists as well. Another really important thing to bring up is that, and this is our second exhibition that just opened in June, Gagijabajwan. It's curated by Lois Taylor Biggs, who is Cherokee Nation and Ojibwe. And she invited 4 Anishinaabe artists to come and be a part of the show. This was really important for us, and this was supported by the Terra Foundation as well. It's really important for us because our mission is not only to show Native art, but in lieu of, as Native people, it's kind of awkward for us to do a land acknowledgement, particularly since, one of our co-founders is Potawatomi and we're on her homeland. So in lieu of that, and in lieu of just making a statement and just saying words, we show by action, of course. We always make sure that there's space for Native artists that, have ancestral ties to the land in Chicago. So this is fully a Great Lakes show. Like, even though these folks don't live in Chicago, Lois does, but the other artists don't, they're tied to this whole general area because they're Great Lakes people. In our previous show too, in Native Truths, we have artists that represent, Potawatomi Nation. We have other artists that are Ho-Chunk, and Ojibwe. And so, we always want to make sure that we have that balance, that we have at least 1 or 2 artists that represent those nations. Another thing too, I don't know if you'll notice, that we're very passionate about is, even in the Native art field, men tend to dominate that as well. So we really try to have more women artists over men artists. Or it's an equal balance, but we never want the male artists to outnumber the women artists. We really want to, make sure that all of our Native women artists are noticed also. This is our current exhibition as well. So it's running concurrently with Gagijabajwan, the Upsetters. These are, really close friends of mine. You'll see David Martin over here also. So again, making sure there's that representation. David Martin, who's Pokagon Potawatomi, April Holder, who is Sac and Fox, Amber Gunn Gauthier, who is Ho-Chunk and Menominee. So we're making sure that, they have that space and that representation as well. But with this show, we wanted to highlight painters. We wanted to highlight natives as painters. Because when you go into museums and you see art of native people, they're always, Indians painted by white men. So, how often do you go into a museum where you can see native people painting ourselves, painting other native people, painting what we like? So, Ryan Singer is really great in that, he's just so in tune with like pop culture, and he uses a lot of pop culture references. As well as, Amber, she loves, horror, she's goth queen. So, she does a lot around, just representing like natives in horror films. So, here's Will Sampson from Poltergeist. I think that's what that is. So, that's really cool because these are like genres and things that people don't always associate natives with, but we're there. We're in those spaces as well. And we do a lot of programs. We host a lot of artist talks, presentations, poetry readings, workshops. And we do another thing that's so important that we do is because our space is a native space, it's built with, Indigenous foundation and, just our values are embedded in the work that we do. We want to make sure that when Native people come into our space, that they feel safe, that they feel they can come into this space without any of those concerns or worries of having to explain who we are to people. Like, we could just come in and actually just be ourselves. We can just come in and actually just talk about art for once, not talk about like all the things that we have to educate everybody about all the time, and it gets so exhausting. So, hopefully this is a space where people can come, and they do. We get Native people that come in and we laugh, we joke, we eat, we drink. So we do all the things that, we can just without any worry. So, we do host a lot of those kinds of like exclusive events. So we'll have events that are just only for our Native community. Or anytime we have an exhibition opening, the first hour is always for Native community first. So that way, we can set that tone. We can, we're already comfortable in the space before we open the door for other people to come in and join us. So just some more programs. We have a biennial Mound Summit Symposium. This past year in December, we focused on Native curators because, we're not just here to support Native artists, but, in changing practice and changing the field, we also have to support, and nurture emerging artists, or not artists, I'm sorry, curators that are Native, that are curating Native art. It's so important to have that perspective and that lens as well going into these big institutions. And these are just our two artists in residence, Noel Garcia and Camille Billy. And then next year we'll have two more artists in residence. And again, right now they're just local. We'll have June Carpenter and Lydia Cheshawala. And our work is really a lot about community, not just, creating the space for, Native artists, but it's also creating space for our larger community. Our practice goes beyond just caring for the artist. Our practice also includes caring for the artists as people. We make sure that, when our artists come to visit, all of our artists get an artist fee. They all get paid. We take care of their travel. We take care of their hotel. We give them, per diems. We started to actually give per diems where, we have food at all of our gatherings, so nobody ever leaves our space going hungry. If anything, people go away from our space with food because we always have to-go containers. We always have so much food, but it's always better to have more food than little. We care for people in a way that, we're welcoming them into this space that's their home. And we remind people that, when you come to Chicago, come here. This is your home. You're always welcomed here. I've been trying to get Christine to come out. Jason's been out a couple times, and so has David. And, I hope they could attest to that. So I think I'm about done. This is the front of our space. This is me with Monica. This is where you can find me. I do invite all of you. Chicago's not very far. I do invite you all to come and visit us, have conversations with us, talk to us, ask about the art. So again, we're not just imagining the future, we're realizing it. Cheers. Thank you.
Hamatakepi. Chante washteya na pe chiu zapi. Dakota emakiapie. Lakota wia hemacha. Ga wazi ahaha elomawapi. Hello, my relatives. I shake all of your hands with a good heart. My name is Dakota. I'm a Lakota woman. I'm enrolled in the Pine Ridge Reservation. I'm also the Associate Curator of Native Art at the Denver Art Museum. And I would like to thank the Racklin for inviting me to come and speak to you today. I would like to thank the Pogigan Potawatomi for allowing me to speak on your homelands. My museum sits on the homelands of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, along with 68 other communities, nations who have ties or connections to that area. I really would like to know what I am doing at the Denver Art Museum. Okay, so as Jared has mentioned, I work at the Denver Art Museum. I've been there for about 5 years, and today I'm just going to talk to you about the different ways my responsibilities show up in that museum, and some of the programs that we're doing to uplift and support Indigenous people. One of my primary responsibilities is for our permanent gallery spaces. So the Denver Art Museum has probably one of the largest collections in this country, if not the world. We have 18,000 objects. We dedicate about 20,000 square feet of space to showing Indigenous art. And I feel very privileged to be able to do that because so many museums just dedicate a very small amount of space. So to be able to really show and uplift Native voices in this, with this amount of dedication is special to me. We have kind of a unique collecting museum in that, as Debra spoke, a lot of people were collecting Native artwork, kind of assuming we'd be gone. So they have these deep histories of these historical collections, and now they're kind of like, ooh, Native art is so important, let's get on the contemporary bandwagon, but they can't tell that middle story, and that's one way that the Denver Art Museum differed, in that they worked with contemporary artists at every moment in time. So we have been collecting Native art for 100 years, and we can tell that story from the historic to the contemporary with all of these timelines in between. And again, just kind of breaking down what our gallery spaces look like. We have one whole third floor, and that is about 16,000 square feet. And then we have a lower, another floor, a second floor, and we have about half of that. It's about 3,000 square feet for the Northwest Coast and Alaskan Native. So I'm just going to kind of show you some of the layouts of our museum. So when you come off the elevator at our museum, our big ooh-ah moment is Mud Woman that was built by Roxanne Swensel, and that was always meant to be, it was built on site at the museum. It was built in community, not just Native community, but everybody could contribute to creating this work. And she's so large, she actually can't leave the museum. Unfortunately, there are no doors big enough for her. But she greets everybody when they come off the elevator, and she was always meant to provide a welcoming presence when entering the Indigenous galleries. What I'm going over first is called our South Tower. It's around 8,000 square feet, and it was divided we recently reinstalled our galleries in 2021, and this space was kind of divided into three themes that we wanted to explore. So the first theme was really talking about the artistic legacy of the Naranjo family. Mud Woman was made by Roxanne Swensel. She's a member of that family. And then right here behind her, you see some of the other members of the family. This is another view of that shot. So we've got work from that pot, like kind of right at the front is from Rose Naranjo, kind of the matriarch of the family. We worked with Tessie Naranjo, one of her daughters, to put this platform together. And these are all relatives, descendants from Rose that are creating work on this platform. Then we moved into exploring identity, and that was really about uplifting Native voices to talk about the complicated nature of the Indigenous experience in a dominant culture. What we were really trying to do throughout all of the exhibition spaces, but I think it articulated itself very well in this space, was just surprise people about what they thought they knew about Indigenous people in the world. I kind of like to make the bad joke that this is where we hold our pretendian art, but that's not really true. Unfortunately, one of the pieces that is shown in this picture was by somebody who was pretending to be Native. It's no longer on display, by the way. But what we did in this space was really try to show and actually throughout all of the floors, really to show this continuum of creativity in Indigenous artwork. So we're really trying to dispel myths about like the historic, the anthropological. Debra mentioned, often as Indigenous people we're seen as relics of the past instead of a living, breathing cultures that are thriving today. So we tried to, instead of showing like just historic or organizing our gallery spaces in any kind of linear form, we really organized them around story and tried to show the through line of our own artistic canons and the trajectory that our people were taking in art making. This third section is called History Through Indigenous Eyes. It is potentially the most painful section for people to walk through because it tells a lot of histories that you aren't always going to hear in the history books, in the media, or through dominant culture. Here we have a piece by T.C. Cannon, who is talking about the poor quality of meat that they were, that the people would receive in Fort Sill. And of course, we have The Scream by Kent Monkman, which has become like a synonymous or an iconographic imagery surrounding the boarding school experience of Indigenous people in the US and Canada. This is just another view of those same galleries. We've got a really beautiful work by Jim Denemy, who has these vignettes of different historical moments, but just with his own, I don't know if any of you are familiar with him, but he's got a really tongue-in-cheek sense of humor and the way that he would depict things. So there's a lot of like truth telling in a funny way. And, then we've got these two works, the arrows and the cross-like figures from Nicholas Galanin. As was mentioned in my bio, I did work on Hearts of Our People, and that was the first time that I had been in an Indigenous space where they had a reflection space, where people could go and kind of either think about what they'd seen or process about what they'd seen. It happens to be very close to this History Through Indigenous Eyes section, which is painful, but we would have this space either way, because you never know what's going to be traumatic to an Indigenous person. Sometimes, and that's happened before, where somebody comes in and sees a family heirloom and didn't know where it went. They had a picture of it, but the family sold it, or they lost it over time. And so it's traumatic for people to be in these spaces, in these Indigenous spaces. So allowing them a place to sit and regroup and reflect, I thought was important. But actually, anybody can use this space. Okay, so when you leave the South Tower, we have an area that is our artist in residence space. I'll show you a picture of that later. But you move through the artist in residence space, and then you come into our homeland section. And this is new for the Denver Art Museum. They never really talked about the people that originated in this land. And so what I did, and it was kind of a lesson I learned by being at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, where focus groups there were like, if we are the natives of this land, why is our artwork just relegated to the back room, or you just show one or two pieces? I thought that was really important. And so when we reinstalled our space, we made room to really honor and pay homage to the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho folks. And we did that by working with a committee of about 9 advisors from those communities to talk to us about, like, what would that look like? What kind of objects should we show? And even what kind of speakers would you like to have present in the space, and talking about your experiences? What would you like the non-Indigenous world to know about your cultures? So it's really to ground our visitors and make them aware that they're standing on somebody else's homeland. It was also to foreground those people. And then, of course, we also talk about the other nations who had connections to Denver and the surrounding region just through migratory routes or hunting or trade practices. And then you come out of the homeland section and you go into our North Tower. And in this tower, we kind of followed through some of the things with the South Tower. We always combined the historic with the contemporary. We didn't put anything in a linear timeline. We really focused all of the installations around storytelling. And we were kind of baffled on how, or even if we should have a section that was organized regionally, just because of the problematics of that. And so we tried to kind of challenge that in different ways through the design and the installation of our galleries. So here you see walls that are installed, but with these cutouts. And we really wanted to do this for a couple of reasons. And we did this throughout the gallery. And that's because we wanted to really reinforce that these borders, these boundaries were very porous. They weren't hard set lines, as people would like you to believe, that motifs and trends and religions and many things were going back and forth through different territories, depending on who was aligned or who was at war with each other. And so we wanted to reinforce this through the design. But we also wanted to pull people deeper into the space, and we wanted them to realize how vast this continent was and how much diversity of Indigenous people there are. So one of the ways we did this, we don't have a prescribed route for going through the museum. Anywhere you stand, you should be able to catch a glimpse of another area of museum that we're hoping will use a visitor's own curiosity to pull them forward and to pull them into learning more about Indigenous people. So this is a really nice angle where you can see, on the one hand, we're talking about plains, and in this foregrounded section, we're talking about how like floral, geometric, and pictorial beadworking kind of came and went in style trends. But you can also see baskets from the basket craze of California, which I'm going to say in quotes. I'll explain that to you later. And you can even see the Southwest section. So we're hoping people will just get pulled through the space in a direction that they feel inspired to go through. And another way, we really tried to problematize through the way we wrote our labels to make sure people know that today, something is called, well, first of all, California was never a region, right? It's a state today, but it was also like a mythical place that people thought they were going to find gold and paradise, things like that. So that's one of the reasons it's in quotations. But a lot of our labels and things really talk about the area that's today known as, Oregon, or that's today known as Montana, to signify that it was something before, it will be something after. We're in just this one moment of time, and Indigenous people have been on this continent for eons. These last 400 years, we can't predict what will happen in the next 400. So in this area, we really, again, kind of coming back to this point about the continuum. So you see a contemporary painting on the right by Kevin Red Star. You see a more historic young girl's dress of a crow elk tooth dress, just left of it. So just to make that connection, that visual connection for the visitor. And then we're showing the motifs that Ponca artist Julie Buffalo Head uses in her contemporary painting with this fashion piece that was created by Mary Bacon Ryan. So you can, again, like kind of see how things are being reincorporated, reinterpreted, but they have this deep grounding in community words, priorities, and motifs. Okay, so that's the permanent gallery spaces. Another thing that I'm responsible for is our special exhibitions. So the permanent galleries, once we install those, they stay up for a couple of years, probably about 5 years, but we rotate out like light-sensitive objects in that time, or try to tell new stories, but we don't reinstall the whole place. So you remember Mud Woman. She's our big ooh-ah moment, the person that greets everybody when they come off the elevators. And that is part of our South Tower. And in 2025, the Denver Art Museum is celebrating the fact that they have been collecting Indigenous art for 100 years. But for me, that was such a weird number, right? So like 100 years for a Western institution is important, but if you consider the amount of time Native people have been on this continent and have been creating artwork, it's just like a drop in the bucket. So what we did was reach out to advisors from our community. We pulled in 7 advisors to say, like, we'd like to use this kind of as an excuse to celebrate people, but how can we do that in a good way, in a way where you feel seen and heard, and that you just like, that you would want to come to see. And their answer to that was, we really want to tell the story about the things that sustained us, not just in this last 100 years, but throughout time and into the future. And so that was the impetus for this exhibition, which I'll be installing in December. That's called The Sustained, the Persistent Genius of Indigenous Art. And I felt it was really important to reclaim that term genius too, as it related to Indigenous art, and just to say very proudly that we are innovators. So this exhibition will be has three kind of like subsections. The first being beauty, and you can see that we're talking about fashion and adornment as one aspect of that, but we're also talking about how our people really went into making artwork to survive and how they were creating, using historic skills to create these things for the marketplace to feed their families. The next is about connections. And again, you'll see that we're always kind of combining the historic with the contemporary. Deani Whitehawk's piece is on the right, and part of her practice, especially when she's working at this large scale, the time that it's taking her to make a work like this is really an homage to her female ancestors who made this kind of big dedication to create these large, fully quilled outfits for their relatives. On the left, you see we're talking about connections to non-human nations like the Horse Nation. We have some Virgil Ortiz. We have Warrior Woman from the doll on the right from Rhonda Holobear. And then we're moving into spirituality. We have this large commission by Terry Greaves, and really this section focuses around I want to go back and talk about the connections section too. Some of the other things that we're really highlighting is the reasons we gather, like coming together to play games. We've got a piece by Tom Jones, who's Ho Chunk in there, a contemporary photograph. But it's also like talking about our connections to the land, which results in food sovereignty and the ways that we can make these specialized materials. I think Dana could attest to like the skill and knowledge it takes to understand how to harvest and make quill work things. And I know Christine can talk about the long and specialized ecological knowledge it takes to make baskets, black ash baskets. So that's also something highlighted in the connections section. And then in this spirituality section, we're really talking about the stories that have been passed down from generation to generation that have grounded community members. We're talking about the sacredness of children. We're talking about, on the left-hand side, you see items that are brought out for dance and ceremony. So that is a little bit about Sustain. So I hope you guys will all come out really quick now to see the installation and then zip back on out there in January to see the Sustained reinstallation. And then in April, this is not my exhibition, but we will be having this exhibition by Kent Monkman. It's put on by my colleague, John Lukovic. And so that will run for 3 months and then travels around up into Canada. And then in October, we install an Andrea Carlson exhibition. And I don't know if you noticed, but Andrea is one of the co-founders of Center for Native Futures. Then another thing that I do, and I just don't think that anybody who's curating Native art anymore can get away with not doing this, is just like engaging with the community. And so I'm charged with like helping to organize programs or community events. And I should say that we have kind of a land acknowledgement, and I'm going to say that in quotes because we actually made ours a part of our commitment to Indigenous people. So at the dam, the land acknowledgement came separate, and the first conversations really came with our administration to say like, hey, land acknowledgements are getting kind of, the community knows, well, if you know it's our land, give it back. Like that's, are you going to do anything with this knowledge? And so we took that to that question to the administration, and we worked collaboratively to kind of see like, what can we do as an institution, knowing that we are beholden to these folks and that we're sitting on their land. And so a lot of our commitment involves, uplifting and elevating and listening to Native voices in an honest and authentic way, not just lip service. but it also means like sharing our resources. And that for us is space, right? So there's a lot of ways that space can make a difference if Native people need room for an event. I can sponsor that so that they can hold their event there and not have any cost. So there's different ways that our commitment plays out. It's important in my department, of course, but it's actually dictated throughout the museum. Whenever we're putting together our work plans, all departments have to say how they're going to be uplifting this commitment to Indigenous people. So one of these 4 programs are ongoing. We do these annually. On the bottom, you see a picture of a family for Indomitably Indigenous. Every November, this year from November to January, we have a show about young Indigenous artists, and then we have a celebration for their families to come and look at the art and have a moment to gather as a community, and all the young artists get the chance to talk about their art and their dreams. We have a community advisory. We meet with them quarterly. We have 8 members on that advisory, and they rotate through every 3 years. And they are really our liaisons. You know, we're sitting in these big institutions. They look like an ivory tower, and they look really unapproachable. And so having these community members that can also go out into the community and, you know, help either bring people in or just be that connection point. I think that's helpful. One thing about our advisory council is, you know, of course we started them for our department, but it ended up the whole museum uses them because they, you know, everybody's invested in really trying to make our space better, kinder, more accessible to Indigenous community members. And then we always have an artist in residence space. And we have 2 artists that come there every year. You see that on the top. We've got Dylan McLaughlin right now, who is a sound and installation artist who has a piece up. We'll have a film that rotates through about Indigenous joy that's coming as part of the Sustained exhibition. I will say, back to the community and partnerships, one thing I did forget to mention, I talked about sponsoring different events. Well, we have these 4 things that are always on the books. We also do other things. So like October 8th, we're throwing an Indigenous women's author event, and we're having 4 Native authors coming, Matika Wilbur, Robin Kimmerer, Kinsale Drake, and Angeline Bouley, to talk about the connection between the visual arts and the literary arts, but also to inspire like younger budding authors and kind of talk them through like how could they get on this path and stay on this path. And that's really, what's really interesting about that is that was like the brainchild of 2 community members who came together with this great idea, but they didn't have any funding. So then they brought it to me and to my counterpart at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And then, you know, that reached out to like the school system. So it's become this whole like citywide event that we're gonna throw on Tuesday. And that really started with the, you know, the community voice. And then, of course, I am responsible for NAGPRA. I don't know why I say of course, but I am responsible for NAGPRA there. And we, just a few facts about that at our museum. So at the Indigenous Arts of North America collection, we don't hold any human remains. And of course, we have things in our collection that are historic and maybe subject to NAGPRA. We went through, so right now, you know, they just changed the legislation. And a lot of reason they had to do that is because so many people weren't turning in their lists of what they had to the tribal communities and going through the NAGPRA process. We did do that in the 1990s. So we completed all of those steps at the time. I'm happy and I feel lucky to say I have help in these efforts. We have a provenance research team. The museum just started them about 2 years ago. I work as the NAGPRA coordinator, but I have the assistance of our curatorial assistant who really loves to do that provenance research. And then we are now recruiting a fellow, and 50% of their time will be dedicated to helping with these NAGPRA initiatives. So right now, if any of you are familiar with this, you know the regulations have changed. So we have to go back and just look at all of our past decisions, see how we can move forward with things that may have been denied in the past but wouldn't be denied today, and also just kind of recontact these tribal communities. So it's a big lift, especially when you think you have 18,000 community or 18,000 objects. And then we're continually adjusting, learning, and adapting, not only to the new legislation, but new information is always coming forward. And so I would never say there is like one rote way to do NAGPRA. It's always, you're always learning and evolving and becoming better at, and I mean, it really is a practice too. The end. In Lakota, you say, "Hey, nana apekte," and it really translates to, "That's all I'm going to say about that."
Great. So we're now going to transition to this conversation on stage, and then we're going to open it up to some audience questions, just to have a kind of different way of approaching this information and to think about it a little bit differently. So first of all, I'd like to thank again our two amazing speakers. Please, everyone, give them both a big round of applause. I've told them both if I ask a dumb question, they're allowed to tell me it's a dumb question and answer a different one instead. So
I thought you said I could just whack you on the head with this mic. Was
that's
that
also
what,
fine.
I
Yeah,
thought
that's
that's
okay.
how that went.
So the first question is, I kind of want to get in the weeds with you both, because if we can't nerd out about this type of thing in a symposium, where can we, right? So bear with me, audience members. I'm kind of thinking on the inflection of practice when we think about the difference between decolonizing and indigenizing. And that's why we've called the symposium Indigenizing rather than decolonizing the museum. Yeah, when I think about it, right, decolonizing is working against something, whereas indigenizing is working towards something. And I think you both outlined in your curatorial practice how you're doing this beautifully. But I'd love to just hear both of your thoughts on this, yeah, see what you think.
I have a lot of thoughts on that.
Hit
As as I mentioned, and when I first met Jared was when I was working at the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. I was there for about 6 years as the Native Community Engagement Coordinator. While there, the work that I did there was very, very, just important to, helping to renovate the Native American Hall. At the beginning of my work there, I felt like it was possible to make changes because we were making a huge change. And I think that was also the time where I discovered, I came across the word, decolonizing museums. And I used it a lot, but I realized that it's only theory, because in practice, as I was there doing the work and doing the work that I was doing, soon came to realize that, you can't decolonize a museum or an institution that was built to celebrate colonialization or colonization. It soon, became apparent that there are certain people that didn't want to change practice. There are certain people that really hung on to like just the white supremacy culture that is so embedded in an institution like the Field Museum, that there was always pushback on everything, or people would get nasty. A lot of times I was reported to HR. People were using the system against me. And all I was doing was just advocating for Native people. And so then, I quickly also learned that, like what we were doing with the Native Hall and what we were trying to do in changing the practice there was, we're trying to bring our practices into the space. We're trying to indigenize. The whole process of changing that hall was in a very different way. There was so much community collaboration where Native voices were prioritized, Native voices were put at the forefront. And when you do go and visit that exhibition, you hear the Native voices. You don't hear the museum's voice. And so that is an example of, indigenizing that space. But just from what I heard, rumors flying around it within the institution that a lot of the administration, particularly the president, didn't like that. And so, there's a lot of that kind of pull back. Let's pull back to what we should be as a museum. So decolonization, yeah, I think it doesn't work. It's not. It's just a theory. Indigenizing for us is creating our own space from the ground up without any ties to any sort of institution. We don't consider ourselves an institution. We built our space with our passion, with our love for our people, and just completely embedded and begins with our values.
I'm going to turn the conversation just a little bit to talk about the words themselves, the decolonizing versus indigenizing. And while we can say how flawed decolonization was, we wouldn't have gotten to indigenizing without decolonization. And so I think this is kind of like what I was speaking about in my talk, that we are constantly evolving and learning in this way. So I know somebody coined that phrase. I can't remember who was the first to come out with it. Yeah, okay, so Amy Lone Tree. And if she wouldn't have done that work, it wouldn't have spurred us on to really be thinking about indigenizing. And I think in 10 years, we'll be saying something, completely different, maybe going more in the vein that Debra is talking about. But I do just think it's really important that, we should remember these steps it takes us to get at this place. And that was just so important for me to remember when I was talking about sustain, because, it is complicated to be an Indigenous person working in a Western institution. I think I get way more support at the dam than you were getting at the field. And so I feel really lucky for that. But when we were working with the community members, they were saying, yeah, can you imagine we're going to, celebrate our community and we're going to have a feast and whatever. But at the time when the dam started collecting, we were still banned from being in this territory. There was still a lot of racism. Boarding schools didn't quit practicing until 1970. So, in a lot of ways, and I'm not justifying any bad thing, but I'm also saying we also have to be open to that journey. And we have to keep pushing for this change, and we have to keep pushing for it from multiple directions, outside the institution, inside the institution, and just never sit back on our laurels and think it's going to happen without us too. I think that's important. So I'm thankful for the term decolonizing. I'm more thankful for the term indigenizing, because I think it took a turn. But we needed both to be putting us for what the third term is going to be.
And you can't indigenize without Indigenous people too. So you can't call it indigenization if you don't have any Native people there. So yeah.
And that's really good to remember. When I came to the museum, I was number 2. I was a second, Native person working there, and I think we're up to 5, but we have 400 people at that museum, so, these efforts. And I think part of it is, we are putting some efforts towards that, but the other part is also breaking down our reputations because people don't see themselves there. And that's hard too.
Thank you both. And my next question actually set me up perfectly. So thank you for ending on that point. We have a lot of students in the room. We have a lot of museum professionals from around the region. And So both of you in your talk talked about different ways to make Native people feel welcome in your spaces. You talked about the reflection room you have, Dakota, and how there's this moment to just take in what happened and deal with any potential traumatic experiences you had in the galleries. Debra, you talked about all these amazing initiatives. You have the hour, when you open an exhibition first, just for Native friends and colleagues, and but how can institutions do better, if we can't create an amazing place like the Center for Native Futures, as you have, but working within existing institutions, the Field, Denver Art Museum, how can people do better to just make it more of a welcoming space, do you think?
I think it's not it's not that hard to do like the Native Hour or to do exclusive Native events. Um, and we did that at the Field Museum with Native Truth. So before that exhibition opened to the public, the weekend before was only for Native community. So we had Saturday and Sunday for Native community members, and people came from all over the region to come to that. So, we could be in that space with each other, among each other, without people like gawking at us being in there too, or without us having to hear, because even to this day, you still hear people say just really awful, ignorant things. And so, we could be in that space together. And the museum was, more than gracious in letting that happen. And, I also made sure that we had a reception so that like the people that came to that, and I think that's another way to make people feel welcome, especially Native people. We like to eat. Have food, feed us. So that's something that's, like we make sure that that's in our budget. Like we have this huge food line in our budget. But those are easy things. I think just making sure I mean, at least your museum or the museum here, Racklin, is free for everyone. I think that's kind of a hard thing to get museums to do, is offer free admission for Native community members. The Field Museum, that was one thing we couldn't do there. Um, our space, it's a gallery. We don't charge admission. Everyone's welcome to come in. And another thing that we do is, and I'm glad you said this about the museum, your museum, is that we want to make sure that our community has access to our space beyond just coming to visit the exhibitions. We do rent out our space, but we don't charge Native community. So anytime our Native community want to come and visit or use our space for something, absolutely, no charge whatsoever. But we'll charge non-Native organizations, but we're also selective about who we let use our space. Other things too is just like, things there doesn't always have to be a transaction. There doesn't always have to be a what are we bringing you here for? What do we get from you kind of thing. It's like, well, what do you want? What can we do for you? How can we service you? And so, I also like to try to bring together, we're in Chicago. We have Native students that come from all over the country to the different universities. We're by the School of the Art Institute, Columbia College, University of Illinois, Chicago. We have a close relationship with Northwestern. We want to make sure that we can provide space for just those Native students to all come together. So next week we're hosting, I think in a couple weeks, we're hosting a student mixer. So all these Native students from these different universities can come together and meet each other. And so then they feel like they're a part of a larger community. So that's like nothing for us. It's not like, we get to meet more students and they get to come into like a really awesome, cool space with lots of cool art and just gather together and meet each other. So, that's something to provide for them. So, I think that those are really easy things I think that people can do.
My stuff is harder because my institution's big. It's like moving the Titanic around. It actually kind of looks like the Titanic, one of our buildings. One thing that I think is important is to be out there. So a lot of times, you're saying, come to the museum, come to the museum, come to the museum, but also go
You know, if you work for the museum, go out to where Native events are happening, be present in the community. I think that's one, kind of easier thing to do. The harder thing is budgets, and I know it's always like everybody always wants more money. That's true. But, American museums have this really like difficult relationship because we rely on donations, but it's more easy to get somebody to maybe donate an artwork or donate put their name on a wall or do some of those things than to fund a feast or to fund a something that might be meaningful to the community. And I think that's kind of where we get hung up on those kind of things. Also maybe because we're large, but it's like, okay, well, we want to do a feast. Okay, well, who's in charge of a feast? Does it come out of development, or does it come out of your department, or does it come out of learning and engagement? So the first you have to have those conversations, and then it's like, well, who's going to pay for it? And okay, how do we get the money? And do we need to write a grant, or do we need, so all those steps, and maybe those are particularly for large institutions, are the hurdles. Whereas a lot of times I wish I just had a budget that said community, and I could use it, how I wanted to have a feast, to treat elders when they're coming, to, there's a lot of ways that I think we could be more accessible and friendly and indigenized, but we don't always have the budgets behind them.
Great, thank you both. I'd now like to open it up for a couple questions from the audience. So we will run a mic around. Please wait for the mic before you ask your question, just so we can all hear. Thank you very much.
I always love the brave first question. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Paulina. I'm currently a senior here at Notre Dame. And over the past couple of years, I've been entering at different museums, and over time, I've grown to question more the institutions, and just realizing that the more I learn, the less I actually know, especially even listening to this conversation. So I was just wondering advice you have for students interested in museums and curatorial, breaking away from these Western norms and Western ways of thinking that are so ingrained in our own education and with the institutions that we would be interacting with if we go down this career path.
So, yeah, I mean, I think there are a few ways to advise you. I mean, the first thing I would say is to give yourself a little grace, because it's a long journey. It's a journey. And so there are some things, of course, you can learn in the school, but there are some things you can just learn by going out in community and learning from people, your colleagues, and you might fall on your face, or you might say something embarrassing. I think a lot of times if you're non-native, to go into those situations, you're kind of anxious and freaked out, but in the long run, you're going to do better by going out still and challenging yourself to be in that space versus just trying to read it from a book. I think that's number one. And then number two, this is just a personal philosophy, but I hate to get into right way, wrong way. There are different ways. There are different ways to approach the world, but there are just some really beautiful ways about, if we're looking at what it means to indigenize the museum, that everybody can benefit for. Yeah, it's great for Native people because it's great, but it's also great because they're good life ways, right? They're good ways of respecting people. They're good ways of taking time and really deeply listening. They are good ways to be showing respect, and it doesn't matter if you couch it under indigenizing. They're just good life ways. And so just trying to learn more about that and what will bring a greater peace to an institution just can help you, I think, move in that direction easier versus having to think about it like Native way, Western way. I mean, it is that way right now, but I'm just saying that dichotomy doesn't have to exist. We can just move towards something that can uplift us in a better way.
Yeah, I don't have anything. And I mean, I guess I don't want to be controversial either, but
She is. She loves it.
again, like I critique, right? I critique practice. I've been in that space, in that institution. I've, had so many different experiences. I always question when non-Native people want to do things with Native people, or when non-Native people want to curate Native art, when non-Native people want to be in these spaces where they're caring for our items and collections. I always ask why not a different, like your own culture? Make space for Native people. How can you support Native people to, have access to those types of positions? And not to say that they're, that all non-Native curators of Native art are bad. We love Jared here. But I think there's a way, there's a responsibility you have when you get into that type of work, when you're curating somebody else's culture. How can you do that? Like, you can't do that with any real like authenticity. I see curators, non-Native curators more, and even Native curators, like maybe Native curators too, more as like facilitators of the actual curators, like of the actual storytellers. But not all artists want to tell their own stories. Sometimes they want people to write about their work. So, I mean, I think it's just, you have to read the room, right? You have to know what that situation is. You have to be flexible, and you kind of have to go with, who you're working with and what they expect, right? And I think also open doors. I think white people have more access to things that than we do. Open those doors for us. Open those doors, get into those spaces, and then bring us along and step aside. I just feel like sometimes there are certain positions that some people hold, they hold forever, and they never step aside, even with the promise of, oh, we're honoring your voice, we want you to have this space, but then they're still holding those positions. So those are the things that I see. I see that all over, and that's why I criticize that. You know, help make space for us and put us in those positions.
And I just want to respond to what you said about facilitate. I love that word, and I think that is a really good, like in my case, even as a Native artist, I find myself I think I'm more of a facilitator and a steward than a curator. I mean, although, that's my official job title, but really it's about like, okay, like how can I get this in here? How can I use my position to kind of make an inroad for not just someone else, but a new kind of artwork or any of those things?
Thank you both for being here. This is Joe again. I have a question that primarily lands with you, Dakota, and it's about collections within a larger institution. You showed a lot of very compelling work, especially contemporary work that was catching my eye, even in a slide. At your museum, do you share collections? Is it likely that a Native artist would appear in a contemporary gallery, in a 19th century gallery? Do you make joint acquisitions? Do you have joint advisory councils? How is it that you have that moment of your own, but then are a part of the larger museum family?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do share. We can share purchases. We share designations. So even if one department pays for it totally, we can share the other places that it is relevant. Like if it's a contemporary artist, it will still show up under modern and contemporary, even if it's our department that paid for it. We also share in the exhibition space. So I don't know, the dam's at this kind of cool moment where everybody in there is like hungry to collaborate. And so all of our
curators are kind of like riffing off of each other. And so we have Indigenous art in every gallery except the Asian gallery right now, but you'd never know because, so, I mean, things can change depending on the stories that people want to tell. Yeah, yeah. So see, this is so yeah, we do share quite a bit and consult with someone. So like the chief curator of photography is often saying like, what do you think of this artist? Would this help your collection if I invest? And I'm trying to think, I think most modern and contemporary purchases come through our department, but often we will co-purchase together with modern and contemporary.
Well, thank you, everyone. Please give our speakers a big round of applause again. So we're now going to have around an hour and a half for lunch. I please encourage all of you to come back for the 2 sessions this afternoon. We have a lot of amazing artists who are going to share about their practice and their experience and thoughts. So please meet back here at the in the auditorium of the Snipe Museum of Art, which is part of the Rachlin Murphy Museum of Art, which is part of the University of Notre Dame, at 1 o'clock this afternoon for the second session. So thank you, everyone, for joining us.